Today, we're going to be talking about leadership and how to align a company to rapidly changing market conditions and building to where the ball is going to be rather than to where it is today. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with Sandesh Patel. Welcome to another FUTR podcast. The best way you can help this channel is by subscribing, so clicking that button is greatly appreciated. Today we have with us Poojan Kumar, founder and CEO of Clumio, an AWS-centric SaaS-based data protection platform. Now when Clumio started in 2017, they anticipated the huge shift to cloud. The shift was slow going at first, but since the pandemic, a massive acceleration toward the cloud has been happening, and Clumio is well positioned to take advantage of this transformation. Staying in front of these changes and timing the market has been incredibly challenging. So we are going to talk with Poojan about how Clumio has evolved and how they look at the market to predict where it is going and what it will need. Welcome, Poojan.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sandesh. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to get caught up on where you guys are. And I think, these sort of leadership discussions are really fascinating to me because, running a business is really challenging, right? And being forward looking in the market is really tough. And I think you guys, when you first came to market and you had this cloud-based data protection piece, I'm like, wow, it's going to be a lot to move all that on-premise data into the cloud, and that's challenging. And I thought, you know what? There's something else going on here. There's like a vision here that I'm missing. And then when I kind of got an understanding of like the fact that you were really looking at the market having this just huge shift to cloud, and you were preparing the way for that cloud presence when the majority of things were going to be in the cloud rather than on-prem. And once I saw that piece of it, I thought that was a very fascinating piece to me. And so I'm really curious to see what you're how you got to that place, how you found that perspective, and how you analyze the market to really see where things were going like that. But before we get there, for the people who aren't familiar with Clumio, could you just give us a little background on Clumio?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, the company started in late 2017, with the fundamental premise of going and, nailing data protection, for the public cloud, right?
Right.
Built on the public cloud for the public cloud was always the premise. Obviously, ultimately, we want to go and tackle all data pieces out there and also go and do other things with the data that we're essentially backing up, which is where obviously building on the public cloud makes a big difference. But fundamentally, today, step one is really about going and nailing data protection for the public cloud, so that when you think about data and backup and making sure that it's not accidentally deleted, or when it's attacked, if there's a ransomware attack or something like that, and if you want to be at a place where my data is secure, you need to think about Clumio. That is our fundamental desire.
Yeah, and I think like I said, I think it was interesting because you had this cloud centric focus, but at the time when you started, the market hadn't gotten there yet, right? So a lot of it was still on-prem, so you had to have a certain amount of your focus to be on-prem, right? And then then the pandemic hits in 2020, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's just rapidly moving to the cloud, right? And so, could you talk a little bit about, just that piece, that initial piece of how you were looking at the market initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, right, from day one, we did one thing right, which is we built the platform on the public cloud, right? It's natively built on the public cloud. So you could fundamentally take advantage of the architecture, and architecture matters, right? If you look at any SaaS, cloud company that's thriving today, even like Snowflake is a great example that we obviously have a lot of inspiration from. Architecture matters, and you hear Slutman talking about it all the time for a reason. And so that part we got right. Having said that, we were very early in terms of cloud and data protection, right?
Right.
And so naturally, and again, me and my co-founders, we came from the VMware ecosystem, right? We were at VMware for some time, and we've built, past companies also in the VMware ecosystem. So we basically said, okay, let's go and meet where the customers are primarily today. And guess what? The customers were primarily many more of them were sitting in the data center looking to move to the public cloud. So we basically obviously thought that, okay, while we have built the product and the platform on the public cloud for the public cloud, let's go and meet where the customers are today. By today, I mean, you're going back 4 years ago, and take them on this journey to the public cloud. And one of the workloads, naturally, if they are looking to move to the public cloud, we felt is going to be backup, right? They are naturally going to say, okay, why am I buying, hardware and software and managing all of these appliances on premises? I'll probably use a cloud platform, and let's meet the customer there and essentially back up the VMware and the entire ecosystem around virtualization on premises into the public cloud. So that's the use case that we started off with, because we felt we were early in terms of going after the cloud use case. But as it played out, right, a couple of things happened, right? One is the pandemic hit, as you yourselves mentioned. So we saw this acceleration to the public cloud, but we also saw, as we looked at our own product market fit, we had a product market fit, except the product market fit was for the on-premises data center use case, right? But ultimately, remember, that was a means to an end for us. We really wanted to go and take the customer on the journey, but really be the platform that does protection for them in the public cloud. But we cannot control that journey, right? The customer we caught on-prem might not move to the cloud. And more we caught a customer in the on-premises, they would ask us for more features on-premises. And guess what? We wanted to build on the cloud. So we basically realized that while that product market fit is interesting, it helps us build a company, but not the long-term company that we actually wanted to go and build, right? And so again, it was still a non-trivial thing to go after, and it's still a big market to go after. But as you look in the future, anytime you build an enterprise company, at least what I take pride at is, let's go and build for where the world is going, not where the world was, right? And so with that in mind, and with the pandemic acceleration, we basically told ourselves that, okay, it's great we have a product market fit for that use case, but let's really go and be honest to ourselves and true to ourselves and go and solve the data protection problem in the public cloud. And which turned out to be like, oh my God, like that is so much to go and essentially do, because as people are moving to the cloud, there is just so much that is desired, right, to go and solve. And which is where the cloud vendors do a bunch of it. Obviously, that's obviously their bread and butter. They do a bunch of it. But ISP partners like us, who have the depth, who have the focus, need to go and build enterprise turnkey solutions on top of the cloud vendor and really deliver it as services that are, again, turnkey services, but with a cloud focus. And that is what we decided to do for backup and data protection. And we're still in that journey. Only on AWS today. And I would say there's still so much to, essentially go and do to really go and really nail, enterprise, problem of backup and data protection in the public cloud.
We talked a little while ago, and I'll put up a link to the episode. We checked, Kenny, from your organization about how you guys kind of put a pause on everything, and you went and just talked to a lot of customers about what they really needed. And so you started developing towards that. And could you talk about like where you are today? Like I know you're focusing on the S3 market very heavily. You've built this consumption model out. And like, could you talk about like where your focus is in that AWS space and how you're differentiating?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you think about it, right, so what we did is we took a pause, as you mentioned. We basically talked to like 250 customers, and these were all customers in the public cloud. We started understanding their challenges, because what we also saw is, including us, nobody was really listening and talking to them, right? And really solving not only what their problems are today, but what their problems of the future are. And if you look at the cloud, it's very different, right? People deploy, they have hundreds or thousands of, AWS accounts. Let's talk about AWS specifically, because that's where we play today. But, have hundreds and thousands of AWS accounts potentially. They have running in multiple regions, sometimes regions around the globe, right? They lack the visibility, because again, when it becomes so easy for you to spin up infrastructure, guess what? That's what people do, right? We see that same thing in our company also. People spin up infrastructure, so you lack the visibility. You don't even know where data is. And forget the fact the data is, if somebody by mistake, and we have enough, cases out there, as you might have heard, whether it's a script going and doing it or an internal malicious user, going and deleting data. Even if you go and delete some data, especially on the S3 side, where there is so much of data sitting across millions and billions of objects, across regions, across buckets, you don't even know that data got deleted anytime. Like, you will come to know in the future. But by the time you come to know, it might be too late, because even if you had a solution like replication, guess what? You replicated the deletion also. So your replication also is not enough. So which is where, there was a real need to go and solve data protection at a scale that was unprecedented. You did not have that scale in the on-premises world, right? Today, if you look at one of our key solutions, one of our key entry points is doing backup for S3, right? Which, by the way, 2 years ago, people would, basically say, oh, do I really need backup for S3? Today, everybody needs backup for S3. And they need backup for EC2, EBS, and they need backup for Dynamo, and they need backup for RDS. They need backup for everything. But S3 is one place where it is so vast and the usage goes so fast. And it's obviously one of the oldest services, actually the oldest service on AWS, if you may. And so, and it has gone from a dumping ground of basically whatever to essentially the primary source of data for newer applications and newer companies that are built. So going and backing up that, where people do not have the visibility, there is scale that is unprecedented, right? And with scale comes like, okay, I don't know if I try to do anything myself, I cannot get a handle on costs, which is where having a turnkey solution, which is also air gap, by the way, because people actually do not want backup to be sitting in their own security domain. You want the backup to go in somebody else's security domain, because that is when you feel you're truly protected, both from malicious users inside or your own deletion, scripts and programming inside, and even like, external attacks like ransomware. So that is what Clumio does, right? We become the custodian of the data that is, on behalf of the customer, obviously. And so in the event of any kind of restore event that you need, we provide, the ability to restore. But what the key is, we also provide the ability to restore at both a granular level, right? Across all use cases, especially on the S3 side, right? You can say, I want to go and restore in this region, in this bucket, only these objects which have this prefix in, because everything else I don't want to go and restore. I wrote my application a certain way. Somebody only deleted this prefix of data and go and delete that prefix. And I want to do it fast. I'm not going to sit like 3 days before you restore the data. I want to do it fast, and I want to make it cost effective. And guess how fast happens? Fast happens not because you're running in the cloud. Fast happens because the architecture you built in the cloud, where, we call it, my co-founder's name is Woon. We call it the Woon's army of lambdas internally. But essentially, that's what we do, right? It's a parallelized this thing, and thanks to what the cloud vendors have built, but the architecture on top of it, what we have done is, it's basically a bunch of lambdas that get, spun out, right? Do their job and give it back, and hence the user gets the restore fast. So all of those things is what we do across all use cases, with the big one being S3, because that's the biggest source of data out there.
I know AWS had rolled out a sort of backup light kind of solution. Can you talk about how you differentiate from that? I mean, obviously you have a much more mature and feature-rich offering at this point, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AWS, in fact, it was a good, funny coincidence where we launched our S3 backup last year before reInvent, and they launched it at reInvent, right? Which again, by the way, you can think about it. I love the fact, because guess what? One of the things we used to educate the market on before they launched it was, oh, by the way, your S3 needs backup, Mr. Customer. Don't think it does not need backup, because 11 nines of durability does not make it available. Two different things. Because if you delete a bucket, rightfully so, the cloud vendor will delete it, right? Now, whether you meant to delete it or not is your this thing, but whoever told to delete it, whether it's a piece of software or an attacker or somebody internally, that thing got deleted. And if you didn't mean it to be deleted, guess what? It is deleted now. This is where backup comes in, right? And so that awareness, we were carrying the torch on the awareness side. With AWS having, and basically going front and center is saying, yeah, your AWS S3 needs backup. It's fantastic, right? AWS S3 needs backup, and they're telling the market that S3 needs backup, which is superb. And now collectively, it's about going and solving the S3 backup problem. And what we have the benefit on is we architected it for scale, right? We architected it for simplicity, right? it's enterprise grade with the feature sets. And obviously we did a broad enough offering, not just for S3. We do a broad enough offering for across every other service on AWS also. So that's really, any enterprise grade account on AWS, they love our solution. And AWS is a great partner to us also. They also recognize the fact that, Clumio is one of those vendors that really goes and solves the problem at scale. And so, we have an amazing partnership with every service team in AWS, starting, with the S3 team. And not only with, in terms of their customers, in terms of even pushing the AWS services with the right set of APIs, right, that we need access to, the kind of engineering we have done together, because we couldn't do this scale just by ourselves. It doesn't work like that. You are able to do this today because you have the APIs that the cloud vendor is giving you, right? And they're not just giving you, they're giving it to internal teams and they're giving it to everybody in the world. But we are actually a key design partner with AWS, starting with the EBS, like snapshot APIs, to the S3 stuff that we today, and all the visibility we have into their roadmap, and they have visibility into our roadmap. So I see them as a great partner to ultimately solve the problem for the customer in terms of the backup use case. And guess what? We are built on AWS. So every time somebody backs up with Clumio,
it's a win-win.
Guess what? It just, increases the usage on the S3 side, which is a win-win.
One of the things that I find with AWS, and people, this is a hot take, so people could argue it, but I'm not, AWS from the enterprise support side of things isn't always the greatest, right? I mean, just from the pure support level, but also, it's definitely an engineer's platform. It's not a platform that's designed around the concept of simplicity necessarily, so having somebody, a company like yours come in, add that layer of simplicity to the function of it, make it more usable by other people to take some of those cycles, because the problem is, like, when it gets too complex, rather than it going to a backup person who's managing other backups and all that, it's got to go maybe into the DevOps group that because of the complexity. But with what you're going to bring to it, you can add that level of simplicity and support that's going to make it more enterprise friendly, which I think is sorely missing from a lot of services these days.
No, that is exactly one of the biggest reasons that, enterprises, are coming to us, is because, see, 10, 15 years ago, people who went, big into the cloud vendor like AWS, they had to go and, basically come up with this thing themselves. They had to throw DevOps teams at it, 15, 20, 30, 40 people working for 2-3 years doing something like this. And we have customers who have come to us and basically said, yeah, I can put 20 people and build this. By the way, I won't build, even like 10% of what you guys built. I'll do something that is maybe good enough. By the way, I have to go and maintain it. By the way, I don't think it's going to be at the cost structure you guys built it, because we do coalescing of small objects and the kind of dedupe and compression, all the optimization. We come from that world, right? We know that world. We haven't forgotten all those things, right? We basically bake that into the platform. So that efficiency the customer gets, all of those things, if I even try to build it, I'll spend all this time and energy. By the way, it's add zero value to my business in terms of, advancing my own, business objectives. And I have to maintain the team. I have to maintain the code, still in my security domain. So I don't even have the comfort level, right? And it's going to be not cost effective, right? So when they look at this, it's like, okay, we are looking for a solution like this. So the do it yourself goes only this much, right? Yeah. And people actually do not want to do it yourself anymore. They did it before because they didn't have an option. Clumio did not exist 10 years ago. So the Capital Ones of the world had to go and figure something out, 10, 15 years ago. But the same person, if it comes to a company today and wanting to go big into public cloud, they will rather use Clumio.
Yeah, and I think these are the kind of problems that need to be solved as the market matures. This is a market maturity issue, right?
Totally a market. And that's why I said, right, like when we started in 2017, we were just too early, right? We wanted to do this, but we were just too early. And at some level, I think, means the good news is we focus and we build the right platform in place. The use case was different, but we built the right platform. So when we made the change to focus only on the cloud piece, the architecture wasn't a problem. It was just about pointing to the right source into this destination.
Well, so let's talk about that. I mean, you guys were really early to market. I mean, I think you saw a vision, and like I said, I didn't see it at first when I started talking, to you guys, and then like it sort of all of a sudden dawned on me, like, oh, I see what these guys are doing. They're really, planning for this big shift. which I thought was really interesting. Could you talk? Let's talk a little bit about like how you saw that shift happening, and like how you were kind of leading your shot there, and like aiming to where the ball was going. What did it take to to identify those things?
It really came down to making some bets. And again, and I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for a very, very long time, right? Including even when I did Accelerator 20 years ago, it was a bet. We did not know if that would have worked, right, back then.
Sure.
So fundamentally that was what, at least I rely on a lot of intuition, right? You rely on some guts, and you also rely on the fact that this is not easy to do. So while you can wait for the market to come, if you start doing it, then there's no shortcut to writing code. It's going to take you another 3 years from there, if you have the money and if you have the backing to go and do it then. So at some level, you can never time it perfectly, but it's all about going and making a bet and saying, okay, if I start building it today, maybe I'll have some maturity, which, by the way, we have a long way to go also, even though we are like squarely built in the cloud.
Sure.
But it has some maturity to get some market towards you. So as the market matures, you're also maturing, right? So so that was the fundamental bet, right? And obviously, the pandemic accelerated things to the public cloud. But even without the pandemic, we knew that cloud move is going to happen. It made a ton of sense, right? It made a ton of sense because, see, my whole career was built on-prem, right? I used to vicariously live the cloud world while sitting on-prem. But when I came to the cloud, what happened is you started seeing, oh man, this is awesome, right? And that awesome feeling of going and building something there, nothing specific to you. Then it's like saying, okay, you arrived there. Now you see it's awesome. Now it's a question of people realizing this, because once either they'll arrive and they'll figure out why this is awesome, or they'll be forced some top-down initiative and it'll happen. But point is, once they arrive there, they're going to find it awesome. And there's always problems. We're going to solve problems. Cost will be a problem. Sprawl will be a problem. We deal with it every day. Like every day, that keeps me up. But still, it's awesome, and I'm not leaving it, right? So we knew that, right? Because we were living it firsthand. So that your firsthand experience of it being awesome. So now people are going to come. The firsthand experience of saying that, yeah, this is not easy to solve. If I don't start it today, guess what? I'll be too late myself if I started 2-3 years later. So I got to start it today, and I have to make a bet that there's enough smart people in the world who are going to find this awesome, right? And so that was essentially the essence of it.
Back in the Netscape days, I don't know if you remember the browser Netscape, Mark Andreessen, yep. I recall him saying something the other day. He wasn't really too concerned about competition in the market or anything like that, because it was such a rapidly growing space. He said, all boats rise with the tide, right? You just got to be there and be at the right place at the right time and ride that tide up.
Totally. I think I'm a big believer in that also, right? Which is, don't worry about that. Actually, it's all about focusing internally. Focus on what you can control. And what we can control is our own execution. What we can control is what we can build. Is it the right thing? What we can control is, are we listening to our customers and building the right thing for them? Everything else, doesn't matter. It's a huge market. Everybody will be successful. Obviously, we want to be the number one player, and we will be in the cloud world, but there'll be other players also, and that's all good.
You got to manufacture your success, right, Sandesh?
That's right. You got to create something that doesn't exist, right? That's the fun part.
Exactly.
And to that point, because you have created multiple things that didn't exist, so you have been a founder, serial entrepreneur, and founder successful as well. So what have you learned from your career that you were able to apply at Clumio that really helped you build the company to where you are now?
Fundamentally, what has worked is, whenever it has worked in a very big way for me, and when it hasn't worked also in my case, right? Means in a very big way. But basically, like if you look at anytime you go after very, very large markets, and there is a fundamental discontinuity happening in the sector, and it's a large market making a big move, and you come up with technology that is just extremely hard to build. So hard that you yourself don't know that you can actually build it when you're embarking the journey, right? Which is the whole thesis of venture capital. That's why it's called venture capital, right?
Right.
So, it's not no guaranteed capital, right? So bottom line is like, so it's like, it's extremely hard to build, but there's a large market. And if you can build it over time with the right team and the right architecture, you have a genuine shot to win, right? Which is where, again, and this is exactly Mike Spicer's philosophy, and I love that, right? I'm a big subscriber to that philosophy. Go after large markets, go after hard to build technology, and that's it, right? In the enterprise space, consumer works different, obviously, but in the enterprise space, I think if you look at any big success, even starting like 20 years ago, like Netezza was the big success. They actually used FPGA parallelism, came up with this architecture, etc. Was like trying to basically be a Netezza with commodity hardware. But again, hard to build stuff, huge market. They essentially went and did that. Snowflake went and disrupted that, right? And so anytime you go after large markets with completely different solution that is extremely hard to build and scale, I think you see examples where you win.
And just for our listeners, just to explain who Mike Spicer is. Mike Spicer's with Sutter Hill Ventures, the VC behind Pure Storage, Snowflake, Clumio, Lacework.
The grand poobah of startups. Yeah.
I mean, just an incredible track record. So I just wanted to get that in to give people perspective.
If I was a new founder, let's just say hypothetically, and based upon all your experiences and everything that you've, had to go through starting these companies, I remember the last time you were in Chicago, you said something to me that I thought was like scary if I was a new founder of a company. And you said something along the lines of, you're going to have way more problems than you're going to have successes. And so you really need to prepare for all the problems that happen. I thought that was
insightful,
like insightful and scary. But so like if there's like a new startup founder out there, what's your advice to them?
The reality is that, including this podcast, right? We're talking about all the great stuff, right? But the reality is there is so much of hard stuff, right? When you do a company, right? And that's true for like everybody hears about the awesome stories out there. Everybody loves to talk about the awesome stories, right? And all the romantic path to success and all that good stuff, right? But the reality is that you have to be prepared with so many of the ups and downs, and sometimes multiple downs, sometimes the same day, right? And so the thing is that is what the journey is about. So whenever, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and people come for advice and this and that, I think the number one thing that unfortunately is that sometimes cannot be taught, and definitely is not taught in school and in colleges and stuff like that, is just the grit, right? And that you have to figure out either, how you're going to have it and whether you have it or not, because that is what is absolutely needed, right? In this journey. Now you can get lucky, right? And, it's a straight line, ride all the way. But guess what? That also you will hit that snag at some point. Maybe it's much later in the game, doesn't matter when, but you will hit it for sure. And I think that is what you need to, internalize. And every company has problems. Doesn't matter which company, every company has problems. It's about how you deal with it and how you're going to, come out of it, right, effectively. So that is the part of the grid that I would say from a founder perspective, that is very important. Obviously, other things are important in terms of, as I say, partnering with the right, the VCs out there. Right? Obviously, I'm a big Mike Spicer fan, as you can see. But partnering partnering with the right individual, matters a lot. It matters a lot in terms of, are you really going and building for the future, right? What's your goal? Is your goal to build a small company and get it acquired? That's a whole different thing. But if you truly want to build, at least have a shot. There's no guarantees, as I said. Have a shot at building a long-term company. Then are you truly making some bets in the future and are building something that is, technologically, highly differentiated so that nobody can very easily copy it, right? In the enterprise space. Consumer space works differently, as I said. So things like that. I think, those are the things that matter. But ultimately, the grit thing is what you need.
So it sounds like A, it's your attitude, your grit, and you got to keep that going. And then B, it's surround yourself with great people.
Exactly.
And help for some people that can help you build what you're trying to build, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and I got to mention, the grit piece of it was what, allows you to make, big changes and shifts and really look at where you are and where you want to be and make some hard decisions about how you're going to get there, like you guys did, when you kind of took that pause and moved your focus a little bit.
Yeah.
That's got to be a little bit of a scary decision to make.
95% of the business when we made the change was coming from on-prem, and we overnight decided to walk away from 95% of our business, which, is super duper hard for anybody, right? But again, as I said, I think that was the right thing. As I said, we could have definitely built a company with that. But again, the question was, what is the company that you want to build? That's the reason. That is what gave us the the essentially the energy and the grit essentially to go and make that kind of a decision. But it was very hard. It was very hard for everybody in the company and all of that. As I said, we're making it sound easy. It was extremely, extremely hard.
You've kind of realigned yourself. You're now a consumption-based model, which I think that alone is just hard to do.
Right.
So like, what's next for Clumio? Where are you guys headed? What's? I mean, you've had all these grand visions, and you've been very prescient, maybe even a little too much so, on where the market's heading. Where's it going next, and what does that mean for Clumio?
Yeah, no, actually, the consumption-based model, I'm going to spend 30 seconds on that, but that's another thing, right?
Yeah.
Going and building that and kind of building all the technologies around it so that you can meter it. But customers love that kind of stuff, which is, I'm not charging you a single dollar more than what you consume, right? You can start off, we have customers starting off with, 15, 20K spend a year, and over time, scaling it to 100K spend. But that's really what it is. They're spending every dollar essentially what they're consuming. And that's the kind of stuff that we baked in, early on in the platform itself. So those are things that, are the right thing for the customers. And, that's a new definition of SaaS, I would say. SaaS is no longer a seat and subscription based thing. It's like more of a consumption based thing, right? And so that, and you'll see a lot more of consumption based model. There's actually companies that are now forming that are essentially going and making consumption based models easy to meter and bill, like, so that, the Clumios of the world don't go and have to build it themselves.
We interviewed a company called Optane.
Correct.
Octane.
Yes.
Optane, not Octane.
Yes.
Which is doing that as well. But I think that's an really interesting space. That's a whole nother podcast. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to really own a lot of the market space in terms of like almost being like an app store, for the SaaS world, by handling all that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Coming back to your other question around, for us future, if you think about it, right, the transition to the public cloud is whatever, 10% done, right, today, right? So there's so much to go and move and to move to the public cloud. So from that metric, if that transition is 10% done, we are like 2% done or less than 2% done, right? So there is so much to go and do, both in terms of, obviously there is a lot of go to market we need to scale on. We have a killer product now. We have to go and scale the go to market. We have, to go and scale, the product itself, go and really build, a multi-cloud platform, over time. We have some very interesting ideas and vision around, going and, building other use cases on top of the data that we are backing up, which, by the way, every protection vendor talked about in the on-premises world. The difference is the cloud. The cloud actually enables you to make that vision a reality for the first time. Again, we also have to execute on it, but for the first time, there is an opportunity to even make it happen, right? But again, first step is the data, right? It's like you have to own the data. It's like, I think about like enterprise, there's three types of companies. Company that owns the data, right? A company that essentially builds a platform around the company that owns the data, like more of a control plane. And there is companies that are tools that help the other two companies, right? The biggest ones are the companies that own the data and do something with the data, right? So we want to be that, right? And obviously we'll get the data in the form of, backup use case initially. And then step 2, thanks to the cloud and everything available in the cloud for the first time, do something with the data. So that would be our next arc of execution. If you have read this thing, or for your viewers, there is a nice paper that Mark Leslie wrote, who's one of our, investors, it's called the arc of company evolution, which basically talks about how the best companies of the world have essentially taken their first arc, gotten the success of it, and somewhere in the journey of their first arc, figured out what their second arc is. And if you do not figure out the second arc, you're going to essentially at some point, go down and collapse. It could be a very large amount of time, but that's going to happen, right? It's a very nice paper by Mark Leslie. But at some point in our evolution also, we're not there right now. We'll also have to figure out what our next arc is, and we have some very interesting ideas in terms of taking advantage of the data. So that's what I would say is in for the future. But initially, right now, as I said, it's about going and nailing the backup and data protection for the public cloud.
Backup and data protection is a really interesting space because you talk about data gravity. Like you guys are moving the data around. So when you're in that multi-cloud space, I got to imagine that's going to be not only valuable to you guys, but valuable to the vendors like AWS or Azure and organizations like that, like they want to know where that data is going and how, and make it easy to move it between one platform and the other, right?
Absolutely. And again, for the customer, ultimately, I think there is just, as I said, a lot to be desired to go and do, because I think, as they say, right, the more things change, the more they remain the same, right? And so as things move to the public cloud, things have changed and they'll change drastically. But the more, as people settle down, they're going to remain the same. And all the problems that we all collectively solved over the last 30, 40, 50 years in the data center world, you have to go and solve in the cloud world.
It's been an interesting journey watching you guys grow from, like where you were in stealth mode when we, first met you guys.
Yeah.
And
I can't forget the dinner that you folks organized. Very nice. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We had that dinner, and I was always surprised about how much interest there was in Clumio from such an early stage. And it's continued along the way. Clumio has always been some of the most popular videos that we've had on the channel. So there's something going on there that is capturing people's interest.
I would always get these notes from Chris, and he'd be like, "We got another 100 views yesterday from Clumio," and he's like, "Why did that happen?" And I'm like, I have no idea.
I have no idea how that video, and all of a sudden 100 views. Like, what?
Yeah, I don't understand those algorithms.
Poojan, thank you so much for coming on. It's great to hear your story. I'm excited to see where you go. And like you said, you're 10% along the way of the journey here, and there's a long road ahead of you, and probably yet another arc even in there, I would imagine. And I'm excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, and thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing your story.
Absolutely. And thank you again for having me, and really appreciate, this journey. And you folks have seen this journey all the way from stealth up until now. And there's, as I said, there's a lot more to be had, and looking forward to continuing, our conversations and our alliance together. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Love to hear from you in the comments. And if you liked what you heard and saw, please give us a like. Think about subscribing. Subscribing is the absolute best way to help this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.